In the name of Allah, the All-Beneficent, the All-Merciful. Historical pathology. Democracy criticism. Democracy contagious virus. Pretense and deceit.
The pretense of democracy is that the rulers obtain their authority and attain power through a democratic process in which everyone is equal and has the right to vote and to make decisions. That means every citizen in the country can vote to elect its government officials directly or indirectly. Surely democracy is efficient based on the premise of rational voters, competitive elections, relatively low political transactions costs, and following the divine laws. A glimpse of democracy weak points.
One. Irrational voters. First, it is not possible for all people to appoint a just ruler since, however wise or conscientious they may be, they can only judge a man by his appearance and past records. They cannot read his heart or know the degree of his faith and his future plans. In many cases, the people have appointed someone whose hidden layers of personality are gradually and unexpectedly discovered, a complete disguise. Many voters are irrational and highly uninformed about many political issues, especially relating to economics, and have a strong bias about the few issues on which they are fairly knowledgeable. For example, members of corporate boards are most passionate and informed about policies affecting commerce. They will organize themselves and lobby the government to adopt policies beneficial to corporations but not likely to the rest of the population. As a result of the difficulties associated with gathering and transmitting information, politicians are unaware of voters' actual desires. The masses are not adequately educated to be able to foresee the betterment of the community they belong to, and therefore are unable to cast a vote to that effect. But given the right to vote, an uneducated man would certainly cast a vote which will more likely be wrong as affected by the personality charisma of the candidate or some other superficial reasons. An ordinary voter may also be lured if people actually make the decisions in the country, and many may be unhappy with those decisions. Furthermore, some have argued that voters may not be educated enough to exercise their democratic right. A population with low intellect may not be capable of making beneficial decisions. They argue that the lack of rationality or even education is being taken advantage of by politicians that compete more in the way of public relations and tactics, than in ideology. While arguments against democracy is often taken by advocates of democracy as an attempt to maintain or revive traditional hierarchy in order to justify autocratic rule, many extensions have been made to develop the argument further. However, education alone cannot sustain a democracy. There have been many cases where dishonesty, fraud, and falsification happened in the election process or promises of the candidates. The fact is that they promise something but they do something else frequently.
Two. Wealth disparity. This could result in a wealth disparity in such a country, or even racial discrimination. Some people points out that such a result is not necessarily due to a failing in the democratic process, but rather, because democracy is too responsive to the desires of a large middle class increasingly willing to disregard the muted voices of economically marginalized groups within its own borders. The criticism remains that the will of the democratic majority may not always be in the best interest of all citizens within the country or beneficial to the future of the country itself.
Three. Benefits of a specialized society. One such argument is that the benefits of a specialized society may be compromised by democracy. As ordinary citizens are encouraged to take part in the political life of the country, they have the power to directly influence the outcome of government policies through the democratic procedures of voting, campaigning and the use of press. The result is that government policies may be more influenced by non-specialist opinions and thereby the effectiveness compromised, especially if a policy is very technically sophisticated and/or the general public inadequately informed. For example, there is no guarantee that those who campaign about the government's economic policies are themselves professional economists or academically competent in this particular discipline, regardless of whether they were well educated. Essentially, this means that a democratic government may not be providing the most good for the most amount of people.
Four. Uncontested good. Additionally, some political scientists question the notion that democracy is an uncontested good. If we base our critique on the definition of democracy as governance based on the will of the majority, there can be some foreseeable consequences to this form of rule. For example, the middle-class majority in a country may decide to redistribute wealth and resources into the hands of those that they feel are most capable of investing or increasing them. Democracies will tend to cater to the whims of the people, who then follow false ideas to entertain themselves, squander their reserves, and do not deal with potential threats to their rule until it is too late to oppose them.
5. Stability. Democracy is also criticized for not offering enough political stability. As governments are frequently elected on and off, there tend to be frequent changes in the policies of democratic countries both domestically and internationally. Even if a political party maintains power, vociferous, headline-grabbing protests and harsh criticism from the mass media are often enough to force sudden, unexpected political change. Frequent policy changes with regard to business and immigration are likely to deter investment and so hinder economic growth. Democracy is also criticized for frequent elections due to the instability of coalition governments. Coalitions are frequently formed after the elections in many countries, for example India, and the basis of alliance is predominantly to enable a viable majority, not an ideological concurrence. This opportunist alliance not only has the handicap of having to cater to too many ideologically opposing factions, but it is usually short-lived since any perceived or actual imbalance in the treatment of coalition partners, or changes to leadership in the coalition partners themselves, can very easily result in the coalition partner withdrawing its support from the government.
6. Minority persecutions. The constitutions of many countries have parts of them that restrict the nature of the types of laws that legislatures can pass. A fundamental idea behind some of these restrictions is that the majority of a population and its elected legislature can often be the source of minority persecutions, such as with racial discrimination. Some countries throughout the world have judiciaries where judges can serve for long periods of time, and often serve under appointed posts. Murray Rothbard points out the incompatibility of the two goals of democracy and judicial independence. If the judiciary is really independent of the popular will, then it functions, at least within its own sphere, as an oligarchic dictatorship, and we can no longer call the government a democracy. On the other hand, if the judiciary is elected directly by the voters, or appointed by the voters' representatives, then the judiciary is hardly independent. By all appearances, democracy is based on the will of a majority. Everyone is equal and has the right to vote and to make decisions regardless of his qualifications. This means that the vote of an irrational, stupid, crazy, or deviating voter equals to the vote of a wise, intelligent and experienced man. Then if two insane people collude, they will be able to cancel the vote of the wise man in a democratic system. Moreover, if a rough majority proves a law against the law of Allah, creator and sustainer of the universe, the faithful minority must accept and respect it. Therefore, the wrong will of a majority will stand firm against the logic and scientific will of the minority and even against the omniscience of Allah.
Seven. Moral decay. Some thinkers believe democracy will result in the people's distrust and disrespect of governments or religious sanctity. The distrust and disrespect pervades to all parts of society whenever and wherever there is seniority and juniority, for example between a parent and a child, a teacher and a student. This in turn is suggested to be the cause of frequent divorces, teenage crimes, vandalism, hooliganism, and low education attainment in societies. It is argued by some people that moral decay occurs when there is no longer a respectable leader who sets high moral standards and when a politically free environment creates excessive individuality.
Eight. Slow process. Democratic institutions work on consensus to decide an issue, which usually takes longer than a unilateral decision.
Nine. Corruption. This is a simple form of appealing to the short-term interests of the voters. Another form is commonly called pork barrel, where local areas or political sectors are given special benefits but whose costs are spread among all taxpayers. Mere elections are just one aspect of the democratic process. Other tenets of democracy, like relative equality and freedom, are frequently absent in ostensibly democratic countries. Moreover, in many countries, democratic participation is less than 50% at times, and it can be argued that election of individuals instead of ideas disrupts democracy. In the cases of several African countries, corruption still is rife in spite of democratically elected governments. As one of the most severe examples, Zimbabwe is often perceived to have backfired into outright militarism. In some cases, the people cast their votes, believing that their elected candidate will attain power, but the politicians turn the tide of election in their own desired case. In this way, some wise people argue, democracies are inefficient.
10. Deviation from the right path. From the Quranic point of view, if a leader gains authority by the vote of a majority of people, he is not Ulalamra and it is not compulsory to obey him as one obeys Allah or the Prophet. Surely because of the numerous weak points of democracy, the words Ulalamra do not refer to rulers elected in a democratic process. Certainly Allah would not enjoin his servants to obey a tyrant, a ruffian, a sinner, a mistake, nor an ignorant man as they would obey him or his prophet, peace be upon him and his progeny. Moreover, if the appointment of the Ulalamra were made through a true consensus, an election would have to be held for each new appointment. All citizens of all Muslim nations would have to agree on the choice in every election. Studying 1,500 years of Islamic history, we find out that, After the Holy Prophet, no such consensus ever occurred. At present it is impossible to secure such a consensus because the Muslim world has been split up into numerous countries, each with a ruler of its own. Moreover, if every country should elect an ulama for itself, there would be numerous ulama, each to be obeyed within his own country, and the people of one country would not obey the ulama of other countries. Of course then there is the question of allegiance when differences arise, as they often have in the last 1,500 years, between two authorities. We then have Muslims killing other Muslims in the name of Islam. But true Islam does not require such absurd behavior which would lead to mutual strife among Muslims. It follows, therefore, that the ulama whom we are commanded to obey has not gained his authority upon them.